Hi, everyone, and welcome back to O Ship. I cannot believe this is the first episode of 2025. The break was too long, and a big part of that was me finding the time to move into my new house here in Western North Carolina. And it's been quite a crazy few months, as many of you may have heard, with Helene hitting the region in late last year. But I'm settled in, life is good, business is good, and I'm really excited to get back to O Ship. And I don't think I could find a better way to start off 2025, the O Ship Show, than with today's guest. So today's guest is someone who's shaped the future of marketing and business for decades, and now he's turning his focus to the future of work. I've had the pleasure of knowing Rishad for quite some time. He's a legendary thinker, advisor, and author, and he's been recognized by Time as a top marketing innovator. He's been inducted to the Advertising Hall of Fame, and he's just more broadly helped Fortune 500 firms navigate transformation for over 40 years. His new book, Rethinking Work, is a wake-up call and a roadmap. It explores the forces of reshaping our world, redefines what it means to work, lead, and build companies, and calls for bold reimagining at every level. Now, if you think that sounds familiar, it's probably because that's something I'm also wildly passionate about. So I think today should be a very exciting conversation, whether you're a CEO, a creator, or just wondering what's next for your career. I think you're going to find something to challenge, provoke, or inspire you in this conversation. And so with that, I welcome Rishad Tobaccowala to today's show for O Ship. And here we go. Rishad, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Freddie. It's great to be on your show, and it's good to see you alive.
Thank you very much. I hope I sufficiently graded as a good hype man for you. I'm a big fan, and it's really exciting to have you on the show today, especially with the great new book you put out. So,
Fantastic. Thank you.
which I think if I go slightly over,
It's behind me, and that's the
yeah,
cover.
you got a much better cover over there. My big noggin's always in the way.
Yeah.
So, look, I'd love to dive right into this. I think one of the places you start in the book that I think is a great place to start our conversation is you start talking about seismic societal changes that are impacting the way that we're working today. And I'd love to just start there and let's set the tone. What's driving this change? Why did this book need to be written now? What are these changes that are happening that everyone should be aware of?
Sure. So at the very start, one of the reasons I wrote the book is because to me it was clear that there are three reasons that people are happy. One is physical and mental health. Second is quality relationships. But third is meaningful, purposeful work. And I began to believe that meaningful, purposeful work, or the whole idea of work, which is very central because if you actually have that, you also live longer and have good relationships, that work was going to change more between 2019 and 2029 than it was in the previous 50 years. And we were not prepared. So that's the reason I wrote the book, which is a blueprint to prepare people for the future. And to show that this was not about COVID, which is what everybody is now fixated on.
Yeah.
It mentions five seismic shifts. One of them is societal shifts. The other is technological. Third is the rise of marketplaces. The fourth is the rise of the side gig, side hustle, passion project. And finally, the fifth is not the impact of COVID on where we work, but what we think about work. And obviously, these five forces are interrelated, but I've teased them out to talk about them. And the seismic forces that are societal are actually some of the very biggest, which are we have declining populations in most parts of the Western world. The US, in fact, it takes 2.1 children per mother to keep the population the same, or per woman to keep the population the same in the country. In the US, it's 1.6. So what it's 1.6 and 2.1 is immigration, which is what most people don't recognize. But we have also aging populations. 11,200 people turn 65 every day in the US. And then five generations at work with very different mindsets. Baby boomers, 62% of baby boomers like me believe in capitalism. 22% of Gen Z believe in capitalism. 66% of Gen Z have a full-time job, also have a side gig or side hustle. And these things are there with or without COVID, with or without technology. They're there. So that sets the framework as societal changes. Then I quickly moved to technology, AI, blockchain, XR, AR, VR, voice. Third is marketplaces, and that can be everything from Amazon Web Services to Uber to Shopify to Etsy, that allows anybody to both access markets or you to access customers. Fourth is side gig, side hustle. Next year in the US, as many people will have a 1099 as have a W-2. So 1099 is for freelance and project work. So obviously some W-2 people also do freelance and project work. But the fact that 1099s will overtake W-2 is a big deal. And COVID really basically made people ask, especially after being at home for 4 or 5 years or 3 years in most cases, seeing people around them either sick or dying, figuring out whether they liked their company, some people trying to figure out whether they like their husbands and wives, all of those things. You came out and you basically asked, why am I thinking about how to fit life into work? Shouldn't I be thinking about how I fit work into my life?
It's true.
Right. And so those five, obviously interrelated, are the five driving forces. And I had 12 CEOs read my book as I was writing it. At the end of the 5 chapters, obviously they gave me questions and input. They said, we've never thought about work the way you thought about it, or all the fundamental forces. So in effect, for many people, the focus is on getting people back into the office. And my basic belief is, I really don't care whether you want to get people back into the office or not back into the office. That isn't solving anything about the future of work. And by the way, that also is a wrong question. How do I get people back into the office? The question is, how do I maximize the benefits of in-person interaction?
Yeah. It's funny. One of the things, as I was writing down the pillars, this idea, I think when people started thinking about COVID, to your point, it was a lot about where are they working? Are they in the office? Are they outside the office? And shifting it to, how do people, if I'm quoting you correctly, how do people think about work? And now,
Yes.
Is that defined, as you mentioned a second ago, of how they value their work-life balance, if I oversimplified it? Or is it more complex than that? How much is because I have my own opinions on this, but I'd certainly love to hear yours.
So what I basically believe is the way they look at it is, look, we are living a life of which work happens to be part of it. And we have other parts of it, our families, our hobbies, friends, etc. And what we were doing was we were over solving for one component, which was the work component, because it was very important because you need income and a whole bunch of stuff. And work also provides you with things like identity and community and things. But people began to realize that you could actually have some of these and actually be more effective with greater degree of flexibility. And there was more than one way, which was working full time for the person. And that was opening to them. They also began to understand new things. Say, look, I like spending more time with my family, or I like having the flexibility to do something else besides my job. So the idea really is, the fixation on most people have been jobs. And this is a statement that's a little over the top, but it's directionally correct. I don't believe there's going to be many jobs in the future. I believe there's going to be a lot of work to be done. Okay. And so I separate jobs and work. So you can have meaningful, purposeful work and rewarding. I do not have a job. I'm not employed by anybody. Okay. I don't have a W-2. I do lots of things which is meaningful, purposeful, and has turned out to be rewarding to such an extent that I make more money today than my most senior role in a 106,000 person company with not a job. But that's not what I was solving for. But the whole idea of a job and work are the same thing, are different. So the whole idea that we have to think about life and how work fits into life versus how life fits into work. I just think broadly about what work is.
What's your definition of the difference between work versus a job?
So a job is a role to be filled, and it's basically something that you go to get work done and you get paid for that job.
Yeah, right? That specific requirement.
So the best way of thinking about it is this. A job is a compact disc. Okay. Work is a song.
Okay.
And in the past, you needed to go to a job because all the songs were on the compact disc or the cassette, right? Today, not only is the song independent, which is it's up in the cloud, but the way you interface it is through a playlist. And the playlist is customized based on your needs, either by yourself or an algorithm. So think about the fact that right now we've connected work into jobs. What if you basically said there's works to be done, and your job, quote unquote, if there's one, is to get some of this work done? So in the future, I think companies are going to basically, not in the future, it's already existing, you all do that, etc., is what do I need to get done versus what jobs do I need to fill?
There's so much to unpack here. And I think some of it is demographic as you start looking at the younger generations are just not interested in working in the same ways that I think prior generations were. They were trained. That was what their father did and then what they did, and it's generational. And they think about jobs in
Yeah.
a very specific way versus thinking about work. One of the things that I really love about what I think has really helped evolve, especially within US culture, I think probably disproportionately to some other societies, there's a hyper entrepreneurial spirit. And I think that hyper entrepreneurialism is much more connected to the concept of work than it is to jobs. If you,
It absolutely is. And one of the statistics that I did not share with you is 72% of Gen Z folks want to work for themselves.
yeah.
But by the way, it remains very high all the way up even to Gen X, Gen Y. It's the majority, or almost a majority, want to work for themselves.
I think in modern society, a lot of entrepreneurs are held at a hero level regard in the media. Sometimes people aspire to be successful
Yes.
entrepreneurs on the same way other people aspire to be professional athletes. I'm Gen X, but I remember being 5, 6 years old, and my mom always loves to tell the story of how they asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I told everyone I wanted to be a businessman with a space in it, by the way, businessman, just to be clear, but close enough.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is exactly right. So there's this mindset. But what tends to happen is we may have all had the mindset, but today with enabling technologies, we can do that. And we can do that in a very strange way where we can have our cake and eat it too. While you're preparing for the future of work, you can do your current job.
I think part of what is making this possible right now is if this kind of new work was only available through technologies that were only accessible to larger corporations and things like that, then I don't think this sea change that we're talking about would happen. I think that what makes this so interesting right now is the types of technology that are enabling this new type of work are either free or approaching the cost of zero, or certainly accessible to damn near anybody. You know what I mean?
Exactly. The way I look at it is I often say modern Moore's law and technology reduce the cost of computing close to zero. That the original compact computers cost $5,000 in that time's money and had 1.5 million transistors. An Apple iPhone costs $1,500 and has 1.5 billion transistors. And the 5,000 is worth 15,000. So the price went down by 10 and the compute went up by a million. The internet made the cost of distribution of certain types of information and data available for free. And what AI is going to do is it's going to make the cost of knowledge free. Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. How this goes even further. Yesterday, I needed to spin up another kind of gaming quality level PC, and I didn't want to go out and get one. And I spun up a virtual PC in the cloud for $1.20 a minute of this kind of super high powered PCs. My point, anyway, is it's like everything is so accessible instantly,
Yes.
and not physical devices in some cases now. And then you start layering on the impact of AI, and it just becomes a little bit mind boggling.
And what we're going to see is many companies with $1 billion of revenue and less than 100 people.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. So I want to quote another thing in your book that caught my eye. You had this expression in there about commuting to the multiverse.
Yes.
I want to be clear. I didn't say metaverse. I said a multiverse. Tell us what that means in your eyes.
So what I basically believe is that the future of work will be multidimensional in the following way. And I'm not talking about I'm gone off on some crazy trip, but the following. That we're going to both work in various places in what I call the physical world, which would basically be offices, events, restaurants, bars, whatever we want. That's one group of things. Second is we'll be working in digital spaces like you and I are currently, utilizing technology to tape, record, connect, etc. But the other thing that we're also going to do is we're going to basically work in, besides digital spaces and besides physical spaces, we're going to work in immersive spaces. So you talked about gaming. So what I often illustrate to people is I said, yes, in-person interaction is important. I do believe it is important. And today, often you can get a lot of it through digital, like what we're doing. But I always tell people I have one and I've paid the money for it and I use it, but most people don't find it cost effective. So if so, go to a local Apple store, ask for a 30-minute free demo of Vision Pro, and ask them to show you the Alicia Keys concert or rehearsal. Okay? And once you see that, you'll say, wait, it's like she's right next to me and we're talking to each other. So for me, the multiverse is all of those things.
Yeah.
Physical, digital, immersive.
There's another type of kind of balance in technology that's out there, and just more broadly, and whether it's on your Substack or in your books, you've written a lot about this kind of balance between data and humanity. And you touched on the impact of AI a minute ago, and through your kind of multiversal thinking, you're thinking about how these things get blended together. Can you share any of your predictions that you have for this kind of future, let's call it like machine-human coexistence
Sure.
in the workplace?
Sure. So I basically believe machine-human coexistence is already underway and will be the predominant way we are likely to do work before the end of this decade.
Agreed.
And what tends to happen is it's going to be this future of AI plus HI. But in order to do that, there are three things people need to keep in mind. One is they themselves need to embrace AI, then figure out how they can adapt what they do, because the way they and what they do will change because of AI. And then start focusing on complement, which is how do they best complement AI. Usually the best way to complement AI is to go deep into HI. And HI is not just human intelligence, but human insight, human intuition, human iteration, human imagination, human inventiveness, working along with AI. So that's the first. The second is, in order to do that, each one of us are going to have to invest and grow particular skills, which are a little different than past skills. You know, we might have grown up and people have said learn coding or Mandarin. Nothing wrong with coding or Mandarin, but just like you could come up with a very quick virtual gaming machine, people today are coming up with incredible programs without knowing how to write code.
Yeah.
Okay. So in effect, what we really will need are what I call the 6 Cs. 3 of them are what each of us are going to have to do: cognition, curiosity, and creativity. Cognition means we're going to spend an hour a day learning because the half-life of knowledge and everything else is coming down. Creativity is connecting dots in new ways, and curiosity is asking what if and why not. If that makes sense. But we're also going to be working with these machines. The way we actually are going to basically, or alien life forms, in order to work with these things, we're going to have to basically complement them and augment them and not do exactly the same thing that they do. So in effect, we're going to have to collaborate with them, but we're also going to be very good at convincing. So we've got to be very good persuaders because they'll provide all the knowledge, but the persuasion will have to be from us, because in order to persuade, you have to touch people's hearts and not just their minds. And finally, the last thing is we're going to have to learn about communication skills, which is very good writing and very good speaking, because the machines are going to write okay and they're going to speak okay, but they're never going to sound genuinely world-class if we continue to hone our skills. So those 6C skills become important.
That's the only thing I think I will disagree with you on so far is you said that, they're never going to be able to do that. I think that's the one thing that makes me nervous about the AI side of things. And I do agree with you, by the way. I think the next phase is cooperation and collaboration. I think the only downside is the AIs kind of double their capabilities every year or two.
It's
And
now
we're
every 7 months. Now it's 7 months.
7 months now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And so that does still make me a little nervous, even as a guy who, is embracing the technology wholeheartedly.
I agree with you. I agree. And the way it's advancing, the fact that it now beats every student at Wharton at a finance course, it beats every person doing the LSATs, that increasingly it is doing emotional kind of thinking to a certain extent. It may not have emotion, but it studies our emotions. And in many ways, I think Yuval Harari has basically said, what if they can tell our story better than we can tell our story?
It's true. It's wild to think about. I want to change gears a little bit. So we just talked a little bit about how individuals might think about how to coexist in a multiversal world with technology and data and humans coexisting. Let's flip the script a little bit. In your book, you call on companies to effectively reimagine themselves. Is there any examples of companies that you've seen out there where you feel they're doing a really good job of kind of reimagining themselves for this kind of future work? Maybe what are some examples of what they're doing differently?
So I think I'll start with from very large to very small, and I'll cross different categories. So one, which is a company that is reimagining itself at scale, is something like a Microsoft. Okay. So if you actually look what Microsoft has done over the last 10 years, it's gone from a company that was fixated on Windows, fixated on doing everything themselves, right? And fixated on bullying everybody because they knew all the answers. And what they now have is a company that has no Windows operating division, that aggressively partners with everybody, and basically has this growth mindset, which is one of the key things that has led it to being as successful as it currently has. And so when people say elephants can't dance, elephants can dance, here's an example, right? And in fact, this elephant basically said they could be going to make Google dance because of what we're doing with OpenAI, etc. So that was number one. Number two, in a very different area of companies, there are a lot of companies which are like Automatic, Dropbox, even companies like in banking, like Citi versus JP Morgan Chase or Allstate, etc., who are basically saying, we're going to hire people from all over the world. We're going to have a flexible way of working. You don't have to come into the office. We want to make sure that we attract and retain the very best talent. And we also recognize that actually in this particular way, we can have a win-win, which is we can have access to talent anywhere in the world. We can mix and match them based on where they are and what they want to do. But because we use them anywhere in the world, and because we give people the option to work 40, 60, 80, 100% of the time, we can actually keep them happy and engaged while reducing our cost structure. And what people don't realize is right now we're giving most companies have this terrible thing of 0-1. So people are preparing for the AI age, knowing, to your point, some of the stuff we do is going to be eliminated. And we may not end up doing a lot of new stuff. We might. That's what people think. We may not. So a company may say, look, I need all my employees, but I need 25% less of them. So this world of distributed work, letting people work where they can, et cetera, allows you to lever up and lever down without doing things like reduction in forces. Another one that reimagined itself also for the future and continues to, in a very strange way, continue for the future of work and then has changed back is Pizza Hut, interestingly. So Pizza Hut basically decided that they were no longer going to be fixated. First, they said their pizza sucked, they had to improve the pizza. But then they decided they were a pizza logistics company more than a pizza company. So when the Apple phone came up, they basically had an app that let you track your pizza. Over time, they said, why are we delivering pizzas to people's homes? Why don't we deliver them to people's phones? We don't need an address. We need just to know where they are.
Yeah.
And over time, what's basically happened, and then they said, to a great extent, we need to control our delivery because much of the money is going to the Uber Eats, etc. So they always control their delivery. But then what began to happen is the world of work changed around them. And now they've actually started to partner with companies like Uber Eats, etc. Because many people don't want to work 100% as a delivery driver, and there were other opportunities. They're starting to change their strategy around workforce. Okay. And they're changing their marketing and strategy around this. And so what tends to basically happen, there are agencies. I point to an agency that said, we're going to reimagine the office. The entire office is going to be about in-person interactions. We're going to run it more like a hotel, not a hoteling concept, but like a hotel. And when people come in and what they do is they either engage with each other, or we get speakers to come in, or other kinds of stuff. And if people come into the office, and at least 25 to 30% of their time should be experiential versus just getting the work done. If that's not true, why would they ever come back to the office? You're going to do the same thing at home, right? So people say, come in and work and have in-person interactions. Nobody has in-person interactions. Nobody goes to a water cooler. They have their own water bottle.
As they shift things up, whether it's the Pizza Hut example or even just talking about how people come back from the office or don't, I feel like there's this prevalent undercurrent that we haven't said the words out loud yet, but is this kind of sense of decentralization, right? Whether there's a decoupling around a kind of one centralized job or just the way that people are starting to design their companies. In the book, you also start talking about kind of organizational design. I happen to have some strong opinions on this subject, but I'd be really intrigued to hear, is there any kind of org design that just needs to be thrown out? That's the old system, it's not going to work anymore? Or if that's too aggressive in a statement, is there things you believe there will be less of this type of org and more of this type of org in the future as companies start to redesign the way they build themselves to support the future of work?
Yes. So what I basically believe in the latter 5 chapters, there's a chapter called Rethinking the Organization, Resculpting the Organization, and also rethinking the firm. Like, why does the firm exist to a great extent? Because a very famous professor who's now dead, Ronald Coase, wrote this piece called The Theory of a Firm. Why does a company exist? And he basically said a company exists because internal friction is less than external friction. But now with modern technology, internal friction is greater than external friction. You can plug and play outside greater than inside. So that's a big thing. So if that's true, I have a prediction and then I have the way the models are going to work, and I'm already seeing. So the prediction is in the future, most companies will have far fewer employees, far fewer.
Just to be clear, I don't think that necessarily means total headcount. You
No,
said
no,
employee in the
yeah,
key word.
there will be far fewer employees, right? So there are far fewer employees. That's number one. Number two, there will be many more firms than ever before because of entrepreneurialism, etc. So we may actually have net more work to be done or net more employment, even though a company may have fewer employees, but it'll be offset in other ways. But this is a key. The ecosystem will primarily look like there'll be some whales, but most companies will be planktons, much smaller. Whales may be companies that have big advantages of whale-like thing, like Taiwan Semiconductor, Walmart, right? With scale is really important. So there'll be whales and plankton. And then occasionally the specialized shark and squid. Okay. Now, in that, and why it's going to be like that is because most people are going to organize and figure out the following. Number one, most of the work done inside a quote unquote company is done outside the company versus inside the company. Most of the people who are the workers of the company are outside the company versus inside the company, right? And so what basically begins to happen is I would ask most companies, if you start with a blank sheet of paper and just organize for work to be done with these 5 seismic forces, what does your company look like? And almost everyone will basically have far less physical space, far fewer full-time employees, right? Much more new ways of working, new financial systems. And so to a great extent, what we're now basically seeing is people who are what I call next generation native, which is companies starting today with no tech debt. So if you've got invested hugely in technology with modern AI, that's at risk. So I often tell people is we always thought about, I've got this organization, I've got scale of spending, scale of resources, scale of manufacturing. I said those scales will matter less and less. The new scale will be scale of data, scale of network, scale of influence. And if in effect your scale is no longer a moat, it's actually water that allows me to flood your castle. Okay. And if you think about it upside down, so I think people have to basically ask, why do you have a firm where too many people are working inside the firm versus why most of it is done outside? So it'll be completely different organizational design. And the other one is there'll be a mindset. The old mindset was basically about classical music. You have a conductor and people play specific roles when they're asked to. The new mindset is going to be jazz music, still making music, but improvised. And I remind people the best jazz players were classically trained. So there's a future for you.
I can't help but feel as I listen to this, it's so interesting, Rishad, that I think we've come into very similar places, but from different perspectives. And Really looking forward to getting through the rest of the book. And a lot of it, what you've been able to do is really look at someone like classic orgs and think about how they need to rethink. And it's not just look through the worker's perspective, but also like how a classic org needs to reboot itself. And I think that's a really important conversation to have. And the subject that I've been working on for the last year plus now, and hopefully to be out in the public soon with our forthcoming book, Collective Capitalism, is this idea that, to your point, it's a decentralized group. They're like jazz players because this free-flowing organizational structure where they're coming to solutions in a more free-flowing, innovative way. I think it really plays into these themes of like independence and entrepreneurialism that I think, and people having this kind of flexibility to work in the ways that they want, whether that's where they work, who they work with, who they work for, how they compensate themselves. So it's got this kind of hyper entrepreneurialistic DNA. And I think that there will be a new type of companies that start to emerge. I think it's harder for an existing company to do this, but I think a lot of new companies might emerge where they're so new, they don't have any technical debt. So they're able to design the company from the ground up around this kind of concept of collective thinking, decentralized organizations. They're going to be able to org themselves in a way that doesn't freak anyone out, because honestly, I find that these kind of new generation orgs, it's a little bit harder to change. And I love your opinion on this. I think it's a little bit harder to change them when they've been one thing and then you try and turn them into another thing. It's kind of like you see these work issues where people are like, where are we, in the office? Are we out of office? You have these two camps because maybe the culture changed halfway through. You take someone like Chameleon Collective, like we've never had an office. We never will have an office. So we just don't think about that stuff.
What happened, Freddie, is despite your lack of any intelligence, you got to the future first.
Hey,
Okay. Which is, that's one of the reasons I both admire what you've done and sort of what I basically saw. Collectives that work like jazz, right?
Yeah.
That to a great extent both enable entrepreneurialism, but entrepreneurs also get benefits of both some collective resources and each other, which is very important. So the way I look at it is many traditional companies are like aircraft carriers, and you all are like a basic amount of synchronized drones.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
in today's world, what you're also seeing is synchronized drones make aircraft carriers look like nothing but targets. Targets for practice targets. They're so slow, so lumbering. And so I remind people that if you're an aircraft carrier, why don't you basically get some people to start setting up a drone force on your aircraft carrier versus just your planes? And then in some ways, what you can basically do is marry the best of both worlds if possible, but keep those startings fresh. Don't take aircraft carrier parts and try to make that happen, but make that force sit on the aircraft carrier as the aircraft carrier, either because both of them in combination are very good, or over time the aircraft carrier is sunsetted. Because the nice thing, which is why I remind people, the world of work is changing so fast. You should start now, because in most companies, it's not the technology that doesn't move fast or slow, it's the people. People much slower.
I couldn't agree more. I want to be clear. I'm looking you, future ship guests, challenge you to come up with more or better analogies than we have had on this episode. There has never been more analogies in an ship episode. You're dropping the gauntlet right here, first episode of the year. We've set the bar. You've got to outdo this now. All jokes aside, Rishad, I can't tell how much I appreciate you being on today, and I knew it was going to be fun. I feel like I could talk to you for 2 more hours.
We definitely will, Freddie, when we get together in person.
Preferably over dinner. And I really want to make sure that people can learn more about you, make sure they can find your book, just even how far I've got. It's an awesome read. What's the best way for people to find you and find your book these days?
Sure. So the best way is if you go to rethinkingwork.io, which is rethinkingwork.io, or you go to rishad.substack.com. So rethinkingwork.io basically has a lot of stuff about my book, including where to buy it, how to buy it. That's number one. And rishad.substack.com is my free Sunday Substack, which you...
Nice Substack girl, too. It's you're like Madonna, just not like the first name.
Yeah, so it's Rishad, which is very simple. And what tends to basically happen is you can obviously learn and read a lot about these things, and ideally you'd go buy a book, but both of these things don't have any cost to them. But my hope is that these are appetizers with the crack that sells the cooking of the book.
Okay. Throw one more analogy in there just at the end. I appreciate it.
You're most welcome. But I really appreciate you having me on the show.
The honor was mine, I promise. Thank you again. I do also like to thank our guests. So For those of you that joined us today, I appreciate you coming and tuning in as you have for all of these last number of years. It's been thrilling to watch the growth of the show and see some of our subscriber numbers. But if you haven't subscribed already, go to oshipshow.com. You can find all of the different channels we stream on, whether you're watching on YouTube, watching on LinkedIn, listening on Spotify, listening on Apple Music as an audio episode. However you're basically tuning in, we're glad you're here. We appreciate your support. The best thing you can do if you are watching on the online social platform is give this a or share it and help spread the word. So thank you for your time. Rishad, thank you again. It was amazing to see you. And we will see all of you next week on OSHIP.
Thank you.